The rivalry is back on.
What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to the Bring the Juice podcast. I am your co-host, Derek Larger, and with me, as always, Cody Felger. How you doing, Cody?
Hey, I'm doing well. Can't complain. If you guys are listening, if you're in Indiana at all, you kind of probably are feeling the same way I am, and it's kind of been snowing a lot. So it's been good. It's been cold, but, overall, man, I've been good. How have you been?
Oh, not too bad. Just getting ready for my cruise that's coming up here in about a week and a half. So super excited for that. And, it's not been super snowy down here yet. It's supposed to get some here tonight, but it's been mostly rain down here. It's a little warmer down here in the northern part of Kentucky. But anyway, we jabbled on about our weather enough here. So we're going to get into my first Colts mock draft of the mock draft season. And obviously there's a lot of other topics that we'll discuss probably here next week or something like that. We'll get back into, and we'll talk a little bit more about trade rumors and, some free agency stuff and everything like that. There's plenty of time to still get into those. It's still nothing really set in stone yet. But anyway, obviously for my first mock draft, I want everyone to understand before you type anything, I understand that there's some things in here that, might be questionable at times. Cause again, it's the first mock draft and we still haven't seen the combine. We still haven't really seen what Ballard might do. There's been a lot of talk with moving up into the 5th pick or anywhere from 5th to 7th. That's been a big rumor with the Indianapolis Colts over the national media over the last few days, and could quite possibly happen. So, and here's the reason why I'm going to just tell everyone right now that the reason why I don't have a quarterback right now in our first round simply is because I still don't know exactly what Ballard's plan is right now. What is there going to be that's available? Is he going to trade up? I don't know those circumstances. So that's why I don't have a quarterback at my number 1 pick here, or the first round pick. So don't get angry at me. I understand the importance of wanting to get a quarterback. I'm just saying I don't have enough information to make that pick right now. But with that first round pick, I have the Indianapolis Colts selecting Javon Kinlaw, the defensive tackle from South Carolina. You have heard Cody and I and a lot of other Colts pages talk about how special this kid is with raw power and just a relentless effort to want to make a play no matter where he is on the field. A very powerful guy. And I think he fits right into what the Colts are trying to build on the defensive line, especially with, the struggles at defensive tackle that we've had. Cody, what do you think of Javon Kinlaw with my first round pick at that spot?
Yeah, it certainly fills a need like you were talking about, Derek. It's definitely something that the Colts and Chris Ballard has kind of talked about wanting to improve. You talked about defensive tackle, more specifically 3 technique. And I think he would fit that bill really well. And that's something the Colts have really been lacking. And I had Andrew Thomason on a couple days ago, and we were kind of talking about this a little bit about the pressure. And I remember, about getting pressure on the quarterback. And I remember talking to Andrew and saying, I've heard, just from on TV and from different people that I know who play quarterback, they were talking about, man, obviously you want to get, on defense, you want to get guys who can set the edge. Like you want to get those guys. But honestly, as a quarterback, from what they've told me, they'd rather have the 2 elite guys there than have 2 elite guys in the middle, because, whenever you have 2 guys coming off the edge, yes, they're dangerous. We understand that. I mean, we Colts fans understand that very well with Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis for a long time. But, the thing with the guys outside, like you can step up as a quarterback. Like you still have the ability to step up, but it's different when the pocket is collapsing from within you as opposed to on the edge. And so I think that's what the Colts really have been lacking a lot. And I mean, the Colts brought back a couple guys who really regressed, honestly, in 2019, and Marcus Hunt, and, even the guy that brought in Danico Autry, who we thought could potentially have a breakout season this year. Both of those guys kind of really took a step back as far as expectations are concerned. And so I certainly think that he fits the bill there at 13, specifically if the Colts stay there at 13. But Derek, one thing that I think that we have to also consider is free agency. And I think this is something, obviously, this is something with thinking in mind, the Colts don't sign in these defensive linemen in free agencies at the 3 technique. And that would be just something that I would consider here. Because, there are some guys, Chris Jones, who kind of had a very cryptic tweet, and I kind of felt silly because I interpreted it as him saying basically,
hey, you never know.
It was fun, Kansas City. Thank you. And if you don't know, look Chris Jones on Twitter. That's the Chiefs defensive tackle. Had a very cryptic tweet. I couldn't really figure it out. I interpreted it one way, and then I was like, well, that was probably actually not what it is. And so,
hey, you never know. Okay. Like you said in your follow-up tweet to Kevin, let us dream. Okay. Let us dream. Okay. Yeah. And you know what? It makes logical sense that Chris Jones might be leaving due to the fact that, you have the situation where the Chiefs only have $16 million in cap space going into this, and they have a bunch of free agents they need to sign. So Chris Jones could be that guy to walk if indeed, they're not going to be able to pay him what it is that he wants. Colts could be one of those guys that could step in and do that. Again, it's just another reason to question what's going to happen in the first round. We're going to find out more in the free agency period on whether or not defensive tackle is going to be a bigger issue than what it is now. But
yeah.
Okay, so that was number 13. Let's go into number 34, our first pick in the second round, which is a wide receiver for me. Might be a wide receiver that a lot of people haven't quite mentioned because I think we talk a lot about some of the names we saw at Mobile and guys like Justin Jefferson and a couple other guys. I think that Justin Jefferson might be a name that we might not see make out of the first round. That's just a possibility due to how many teams want a wide receiver and how I think this is going to go. So with the 34th pick, I had the Indianapolis Colts selecting KJ Hamler, a wide receiver from Penn State University. Hamler has been a solid performer every year for Penn State, and honestly, his stats are very impressive when you look at just some of the quarterbacks that he's had throwing him the ball over the last few years. Hamler is a guy that's not very tall and, is not the he's got pretty decent speed. He is going to run in that high 4.3 area, I think, which is definitely a good spot. And Hamler is one of those guys that has the ability to track the football really well, which again is something that, is not really talked about, but he just has a knack for being able to go up and get the ball. He's just really good at tracking it and being able to go up and make the catch. I've seen a lot of great plays from him playing against Ohio State. He's had a couple of good catches and a couple of good games. So that's definitely a wide receiver that I think would help the Colts tremendously if indeed that's who we end up going with in the second round. What do you think, Cody?
Yeah, and I was just right now I'm kind of looking at some of the potential free agents in 2020. Beyond Amari Cooper, there's really nobody available that really would pique my interest. What do you think? Maybe AJ Green, but he's 31, so it's kind of putting a Band-Aid on it.
You might get him for 2 years at the most, and that's if he can stay healthy.
Yeah, and another thing, he was not healthy the entire season, and so taking a risk on a guy over 30, I think I'd pass on that. So that makes sense. I think that it's kind of interesting because people kind of question, well, a guy like Hamler, he's 5'9", 156 pounds. You ask the question, well, don't you kind of have that in T.Y. Hilton, and don't you have that in Paris Campbell, that kind of speed guy? I don't think people kind of realize that Paris Campbell is not like a small receiver.
Yeah, he's not small.
He's 6 foot, but he's fast. And so, I've just kind of come to the point, Derek, where I'm like, I don't care if the guy's 6'5", I don't care if the guy's 5'9". If he can go make plays and track the ball, that's what you want, and that's what the Colts have really lacked outside of T.Y. Hilton for over the last decade, really.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes sense. You know, and you mentioned Derek, like he's a guy that hasn't really had a lot of quarterbacks that we would consider, you know, great quarterbacks, great guys throwing him the ball. So it'd be interesting
Hmm.
to see him in a pro style offense, and interesting to just kind of see him with, um,
Yeah.
yeah, just a different system and just a different quarterback, different situation.
Right.
He definitely got the speed there, which I think he always loved. So that makes sense. I would agree with that. I think that
Yeah.
makes sense to me.
Yeah. And at that 34th pick, you know, you have a lot of different options with a lot of different positions, especially a wide receiver, because of just how many wide receivers you're going to see in this draft, all the way from the first round, all the way till potentially the seventh round. There's a
Mhm.
lot of wide receiver talent that is ready to be unlocked in this. So there's a lot of opportunities. I actually have the Colts grabbing 3 wide receivers in this, and we're going to keep going with that.
Whoa.
But again, like I said, there's just this is all flexible. But again, you know, we're trying to figure out if he decides not to bring Devin Funchess back. That's again another
Mhm.
reason why they would want to overload on wide receiver at this point. But anyway, with the 44th pick, the and I think you'll like this one, Cody, because it's a position that you have been preaching about over the last few months about really is what the Colts really need to focus on. And with the 44th pick, I have the Colts selecting Damian Lewis, the interior offensive lineman from LSU.
Mhm.
We've seen a lot of, I think a lot of people have seen the clips of Damian Lewis pancaking people. Kind of reminds you a little bit of Quentin Nelson, just the way he hits people when they come inside. It really is a thing of beauty. Uh, this might be a little early for a guy like Damian Lewis. It might be a little early for some people, but you know, one thing you kept mentioning to me, how we need to improve that interior offensive line on the right side. And I'm following your footsteps there, and I agree with you. And I think that Damian Lewis is a guy that if they can polish him up, that dude is a great compliment to have alongside Ryan Kelly and Quentin Nelson. I think that would be a phenomenal right guard to have. What do you think of this one?
Yeah, I'm curious. You know, what would you say he needs to improve on? Why do you think, you know, you compared him to Quentin Nelson, which is obviously a great comparison.
Mhm.
What do you think he needs to improve? Why do you think he slides to that, you know, that pick to you if you think he has that potential, I guess.
I think that, you know, when it comes to his tenacity, obviously it's important to have that, but I think sometimes you lose some of the what you want to say, your fundamentals, right? You obviously want to make sure that every block you do is the same. You want to make sure that you're getting your hands up, moving your feet well. I think sometimes he has the tendency to miss that because, you know, again, he likes to go for the big hit when somebody's coming inside. I just think sometimes his footwork avoids him just because of how athletic and how big he is. And I think that's ultimately just some of the stuff that I think he needs to fix a little bit. But I mean, outside of that, I mean, obviously he's part of the offensive line for LSU that was most likely considered the second best offensive line in football behind Ohio State. I mean, he was part of obviously that offensive line. So not a whole lot to do, just some fine tweaking of some footwork and some ham work. But
Hmm.
outside of that, I don't think there's much more that you need from a guy that's playing on the interior and just loves to hit people.
Hey, that's great. You can't go wrong there. And if he develops into the type of player you think he could potentially be, I mean, your offensive line, man, it's already a strength, but it's like, man, it's just
Yeah.
you're playing with house money at that point, man. Like
Absolutely.
your
You
offensive
can
line is
never
just
make your
insane.
offensive line better. You can never stop making your offensive line better. And it's always good to have those extra parts and extra pieces in there for when something could happen. So it is definitely a
All
good
right,
thing.
right,
All
for
right.
sure.
So,
So
yeah.
first two rounds are done.
Yeah.
All right.
So we have Javon Kinlaw, interior defensive lineman from South Carolina at the 13th pick, KJ Hamler, wide receiver from Penn State at the 34th pick. And to close out the second round, we had Damian Lewis, the interior offensive lineman from LSU.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. Some good ones
right.
there. I like that. So now we move on to the third round. And we've heard a lot of talk about, now that Eric Ebron is gone, do the Colts draft somebody later on at tight end to complement Jack Doyle? Now, see why some people might think that, Mo Alley Cox or some other guys might be able to fill that role. I don't know if I'm not as optimistic, just because we've tried to see it happen before and it just really hasn't. So we might want to try and get another big name guy that could complement Jack Doyle on the other side. So with the fourth pick in this draft for the Colts, make sure I get this number right. Yep, there we go. So the 75th pick, I have the Indianapolis Colts selecting Bryson Hopkins, the tight end from Purdue, a guy that definitely is a playmaker, can catch pretty much anything, and is really good with the run after the catch. Definitely breaks a lot of tackles, and he's a great red zone guy, which is exactly what Eric Ebron was for us. So I think this being third round, I think you could definitely see Chris Ballard taking the chance on getting another receiving threat in Bryson Hopkins.
Yeah, I like that. I thought the Colts should look at getting a tight end if they can't land one of those big guys we talked about, Hooper or what's his name, Hunter Henry, one of those type of guys. I think it makes sense definitely to invest in a tight end. I thought probably third, fourth round, so this is probably right where I would go. A local guy too, so that's good. It doesn't have to move very far. Yeah, no, I like it. I think that fits well into what the Colts want to do. Obviously, with Eric Ebron not returning, the Colts need a kind of that type of tight end, and I'm assuming he's a tight end who is a very active pass catcher. That's kind of fits the mold to what the Colts need to get alongside Jack Doyle and Mo Alley Cox. He's a guy who's if he can do that really well, man, that fits really good into what the Colts do. My brother's a Purdue fan. I'm not really a big Purdue fan. Tell me some things about this guy.
Well, I mean, obviously he's tall. And I haven't really gotten a chance to watch too many Purdue games also, but obviously, like I mentioned, he's a great pass catcher. And they actually have stated that, his run blocking to actually amongst some of the best of tight ends in college football already. So that particularly helps because obviously you see the comparisons of a Jack Doyle. Jack Doyle is a really good run blocker and can catch. But I think one thing Bryson Hopkins is a little better at is just something he's better at than Jack Doyle is making plays outside after the catch. I mean, Jack Doyle, obviously we know you can get that 8-9 yard catch from Jack Doyle that just looks nice and easy, makes it look simple. Bryson Hopkins is just kind of a guy that is a lot more, I wouldn't necessarily say reliable, but he's a lot more creative in how he makes plays after the catch is over. So that's a different element that you could see him adding to that tight end group, which I really think is why you could see him getting picked in the third round like this.
Yeah, and that's what the Colts ultimately need. They need more playmakers on offense, and we saw that the lack of playmakers last year on offense, especially when all those receivers went down last year. Eric Ebron got injured last year. Like the Colts had really nobody out. Jack Doyle, I guess, but like you mentioned, I love Jack Doyle. I'm one of the biggest Jack Doyle guys out there, but I mean, Jack Doyle is what he is. He's reliable, but he's not going to make that spectacular, chunk play like you probably need from the offense. And so I think, getting a nice compliment like that would certainly be good for the Colts. And that's probably where they should go. The route they should go, either sign a guy like that or, draft a guy like that. And so I think that fits really well into what the Colts do.
Yeah. So now we move on to the fourth round. And I have the 112th pick here. So the Colts go about, 37 picks without a pick in. So now they're going to have some time to figure out what they want to do. I have them going with a edge rusher, and I have them selecting Marlon Davidson, an edge rusher from Auburn. He's part of that defensive line from Auburn that was obviously very spectacular this year. And Chris Ballard mentioned it in his interview with Dockich that, you can never have too many defensive linemen. And obviously the room that we have is filled with a bunch of young talent that is still yet to prosper. So obviously we still have some time with that. But like what he said, you need to continue to fill in defensive linemen here and there to see what you can get out of some guys. And Marlon Davidson to me definitely is an interesting prospect. And that's why I have him being selected with our first pick in that 4th round.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned, Derek, you can never have too many pass rushers. You can never have too many offensive linemen. That's kind of what I kind of hold true to, because guy goes down, you need depth. You need guys who can get in there, and Colts got a couple guys that they drafted in the 2nd round the last 2 years. But I mean, if they do draft him, do you think they still bring back a guy like Jabal Sheard?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Chris Ballard is a sucker for the guys like Jabal Sheard. Obviously, Jabal Sheard, not a great edge rusher, but he is a guy that in obvious rundown situations or on first downs and second downs, you can rely on a guy like Jabal Sheard to play his role and helping out the run game. We obviously saw when Sheard came back after 4 games in the season, and he came back and he was just phenomenal in the run game on his side and made it look easy. So obviously I think that Jabal Sheard is a guy that I would bring back personally, and I do think that Chris Ballard would bring him back as well.
Yeah. So yeah, like you mentioned, Derek, they all need the Colts just need to continue to add more and more pass rushers to get to the quarterback, because I think they are better this year than they've been in the past, but they still got a ways to go.
Yeah.
And especially with the uncertainty with those young players and Ben Banogu, Kamoko Toure, even Tyquan Lewis. Like Toure, I guess, has shown the most, but I mean, he's coming off a serious injury. And so I think it's smart to add another guy in there, because continue the whole idea of the competition, right? Competition and continue to get to the quarterback and try to develop these guys. I mean, you got to take shots sometimes with these guys, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And so I think it's just got to kind of what you got to do. I'm assuming this guy probably is a guy who maybe, he's not a guy that, like, when you look at him, you kind of think, man, he's going to be an elite pass rusher, but he has some of those, because I'm basing this off of kind of what we've seen out of Chris Ballard as far as his formula for drafting guys. He's probably got some blue chip trait, I'm guessing. He's probably not refined that trait. He's probably not a refined player if he's going in the 4th round, but he's probably got some tremendous upside somewhere that Chris Ballard sees if he's taking him. What in your mind, after kind of looking at him, is that kind of that blue trait thing that you think that could potentially get the Colts to draft him in the 4th round?
Yeah, you said it completely. He's one of those guys that, shows flashes, just isn't very consistent. He has a lot of those tools that make him susceptible to being a very good defensive end. It's just kind of one of those things that, he just needs some refinement and some better technique with, how to use his weight on the edge. It's kind of one of those things, but he does have some good traits with long arms, and he's very strong. Heard a lot of people say he's got a very good punch out of the edge. He just sometimes doesn't know how to shift his weight when he's doing stuff like that. But that is something that I think, Robert Mathis and those guys can teach. And I think that definitely helps us.
Yeah. And I mean, if the Colts also got obviously they got a new defensive line coach. They announced all these different changes today on their front here as far as coaching staff. So, a little bit about this new guy, Brian Baker. I mean, he was part of Alabama. This is kind of a tangent here, but he was part of Alabama, and the Colts have really talked from the beginning. They wanted a guy who was a teacher, and just kind of seeing what he's done in the past, it kind of seems like he's developed a lot of guys on the defensive line. And so this isn't a wild thing at all to predict the Colts to draft some defensive linemen. And I certainly think that a guy like Baker, who certainly is a teacher, can definitely do that. And so, it'd be interesting to see, though, kind of what the traits of what Baker thinks he needs as far as the defensive line. But, the Colts believe in him. The Colts really want to put an emphasis on that's kind of why they fired. That's kind of why they let go. Their last defensive line coach, because they felt like some of their young players weren't being developed like they needed to be, and so it'll be interesting to see now, man. Mike Fair's out now. Let's see if some of these guys, and if this guy gets drafted as well. Let's see if some of these guys develop under Baker, and so I'm excited, man. I'm excited for that. I'm sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Very good.
That'll be another defensive lineman for Baker and company on that defense. So, all right, cool. We can go to now the 5th round.
All right, we're going into the 5th round. So now with the 142nd pick. So again, it's another wide receiver for me. It's a little bit different one. I think this is a guy that this guy could potentially continue to move up draft boards. If from what I've been seeing, we saw a couple of things at Mobile that really helped his case. This is something that I definitely think Chris Ballard might take a interest in, and that is Benjamin Victor, the wide receiver from Ohio State University, the Ohio State University. Let me correct myself. So, obviously, being an Ohio State fan, I've gotten to see this guy grow as his playing career has gone along. Benjamin Victor is kind of the exact opposite of KJ Hamler, which makes this one a very interesting thing. Benjamin Victor being 6'4", a very tall wide receiver. He doesn't have tremendous top end speed. That's something that a lot of people criticized him for. But one thing he's very agile. A guy that within those first 20 feet that he moves, he is very phenomenal in the open space and how he can get open. He does have very good footwork. He again, for his speed, it's quite phenomenal how much he can get away from some tackles in the open field. He's very good with his footwork. I've seen that progress as time has gone along. I think the one thing that puts him so deep into this draft is simply because his issue is, for as big as he is, his range is not very good, which is odd for somebody that's so big. I think it's ultimately, if you throw it up to him, then obviously he can go up and get it. But if it's not within his arm reach, he has a slightly more difficult time adjusting and getting to the ball, which is something that obviously he needs to get better at, being as big as he is. But his hands have gotten better. When he was a freshman, I mean, he just didn't get a whole lot of time to really do much. But this last season, with Justin Fields throwing him the football, amongst all the wide receivers that the Ohio State Buckeyes had, Benjamin Victor was kind of lost in that. But obviously what we saw from Mobile, he was able to create space on some defensive backs in those first few steps that he takes. And obviously his route running has been very good. He's actually a cross route kind of guy, which is kind of weird for somebody as big as he is. But again, this is kind of one of those things where it's a project. He's something he's gonna have to learn to adjust to the ball better and try to get a little faster if he can. But it is a guy that's tall, and if he learns from what we're trying to do, obviously this is a guy that could be a diamond in the rough for us.
Yeah. You mentioned so I'm kind of looking at I'm looking at this video right now, actually, of toe tapping touchdown here. Wow. Yeah, he does have good footwork. You're right.
Yes.
Man, that was a great play. But yeah, so he's kind of a project player, you mentioned. I was kind of looking at his stats. I mean, every year he improved in his stats a little bit. I don't know, where was he as far as the depth chart at Ohio State?
I would say he was the number 3 wide receiver. I think ultimately because we saw how Chris Olave, who is a sophomore this year was a sophomore last year, he took on the number 1 receiver role because Chris Olave is really fast. He's got amazing agility. He's got great hands. He's just a freak athlete out there. And then obviously you have KJ Hill, who obviously is the all-time receptions leader at Ohio State. So it's kind of hard to beat that. But outside of that, he was fighting for that number 3 spot with Garrett Wilson, who is a true freshman, who's a 5-star prospect. So Benjamin's just kind of been one of those players that's been kind of lost in the offensive systems through Ohio State. Obviously, this last year, he improved so much because Ryan Day being a little bit more wanting to throw the ball a lot more, getting a quarterback that is actually capable of throwing the football a lot better and spreading it out. We haven't had that over the first few years that Benjamin Victor was there, but then he finally got somebody and he made some really good plays. You saw a couple of good ones every night. So, it's one of those things that I think, again, the systems kind of failed him a little bit, kind of like what Michael Thomas did for Ohio State. A lot of people just questioned him because the numbers weren't there, but the talent's always been there. It's just need somebody to help unlock that talent.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't have a bad season, but 545 yards, 6 touchdowns. For number 3 receiver, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, it's not bad.
So you think it's just something where he continues to develop, he continues to figure out his body as far as, 6'4", 199. He's got the talent, he's got the physical attributes to be a good receiver. Maybe it's just something where he just needs some playing time. He just needs to, continue to improve, needs some coaching, needs some teaching. And if you can get him in the 5th round, a guy like that, I don't know why you say no to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously, Ohio, you watched all of Ohio State's games, so probably Benjamin Victor more than probably anybody listening to this podcast. And so,
yeah, I know quite a bit of him. Yeah.
So if he continues to develop, what do you think he can turn into? Best case scenario here.
I think he can turn into what a Devin Funchess what we wanted him to be is, that potential a red zone wide receiver that can go up and get it, because obviously he's taller than most corners. He's got good height and obviously the footwork's there. And he's just a guy that, every now and again you can see a couple big plays, especially in the open field. I remind you that, again, I said that his speed isn't as incredible as some other wide receivers, but again, his agility is really good for somebody his size. So I look for him to be a Devin Funchess type player, the kind of thing that we wanted Devin Funchess to be this last year.
Yeah, and you could even bring back Devin Funchess. The Colts have some speed guys, Paris Campbell, T.Y. Hilton, and if you draft, you draft the other speed receiver, you have 3 speed receivers there. And then you bring in, a guy like Victor, and you bring back Funchess. You got 2, possession guys, big guys. I think they complement each other really well. And so I think this could potentially be a really good thing. You got a guy like Zach Pascal who kind of had a good, kind of a breakout season. And you look at that wide receiver group, man, if you add a couple guys, even if you add a guy in the 5th round, that is tremendously better than it was last year. And even if you have injuries, you have some young guys, some guys who can prove it, which I think is something the Colts were kind of lacking last year. So I like it. I like that pick.
All right. And so I'll kind of place these last 3 here into one big bundle, just since they're kind of all in the same area. And this last guy that I'm going to mention, you might know a little more about his tendencies than myself because you are a fan of this guy's team. So I'm going to mention him in a second. So the 173rd pick, I have Justin Herman, a offensive tackle from Wake Forest. That's my 173rd pick. And with the 191st pick in the draft, I have the Colts selecting Kendall Coleman, an edge rusher from Syracuse. That's another one. And then the last pick, the 204th pick that I have them going with is Tommy Kramer, the interior offensive lineman from Notre Dame. So obviously you're a fan of Notre Dame. I don't know how closely you've watched Kramer. I didn't know if you wanted to give me a little bit of more insight on what you thought of him throughout this last year or so.
Yeah, so admittedly, I didn't watch as much actually this year of Notre Dame as I normally do. So I'm gonna I'm gonna look up a little bit about him. I don't know a ton about him. But I want to look up a little bit and kind of give you some insight from some of the experts, people who have
Gotcha.
watched him a lot more than I have. But
Yeah.
while I'm doing that, I guess you could talk about these other two guys.
Yeah. Obviously, we've all been talking about, whether or not Anthony Costanzo is going to be back. Obviously, Justin Herman's not really much of a replacement. Obviously, if you're trying to get him in the, sixth round, I mean, obviously that's not a big thing. But like I mentioned before, having that extra offensive lineman there, and Chris Ballard has had the tendency over the last few rounds to kind of pick more offensive linemen to add to his list. So it makes total sense that you would get a guy like Justin Herman, who obviously was the lead in that Wake Forest offense that they had. Is a good sized body. They said that his weaknesses are that he's not he's very inconsistent with his hands and his hand placement. That's kind of something that needs to get fixed, especially on the run blocking. And obviously, with the way this offense likes to run the football, it's pivotal that we have a guy that's able to run block just as well as he does pass blocking. So makes sense for that. It's just another prospect for that. And Kendall Coleman, edge rusher from Syracuse. We kind of seen the Syracuse is kind of one of those teams that, upsets somebody every year that you just never see coming. And their coach is actually the former Bowling Green head coach where I went to college at. He's a very good coach. I know that he likes some Rough Riders on the edge on the defensive line. So Kendall Coleman's definitely that guy. He definitely has that tenacity about him. It's just kind of another one of those things where I kind of mentioned the same thing about Marlon Davidson, how, just being able to move his body in certain ways to beat the rush. That's kind of something that Kendall Coleman's going to have to work on. But obviously, that's, again, another thing where we were talking about just more defensive linemen. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, you don't have many people in the, in a secondary or, a linebacker pick or something like that. I understand that in the sixth round, I was actually debating on whether or not to go with a safety or a potential running back to add to this list. I might do that as further along in the draft because I know I have a lot of offensive linemen in here and a couple wide receivers, but that's just where I'm at right now with those.
Sure. That makes sense. Okay, here's what I picked up on Tommy Kramer.
Okay.
So he's 6'6", 319, so he's a big guy. One thing that, it's just like he's such a large individual. It's really hard, I guess, for defenders to kind of get around him because he's just so massive.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in the interior, which helps. And he's really, he's a type of guy that he can kind of steamroll over some people. And he's, the good thing is, like, since he's so big, he can kind of re-anchor against some of those big power rusher guys. And that helps against some of those giant guys in the NFL. And so, he has some recovery flexibility, which means he can re-anchor whenever some of those guys bull rush. And whenever he's facing power, I mean, he's such a big individual that he can handle that. And, but, kind of with that, with really any guy that's big like that, he can kind of plot around a little bit, I guess is the word. Maybe he kind of lacks explosiveness a little bit as far as like offensive line is concerned. And that could be one of his concerns, going in is just, the NFL of athleticism. Is it there? And that's just something that you can just ask yourself. And that's why you probably have him this late because he's just a guy that I think he needs a lot of refinement. He needs a lot of work. He's definitely a project guy. He has a lot of things that you'd like to see in an offensive lineman, especially in the interior, but he's a guy that, even though I say he can handle the bull rush, he sometimes struggles because, I think he just needs to work on whenever handling the bull rush, how to handle it sometimes. I think sometimes he kind of gets caught on his tiptoes a little bit and kind of, loses momentum and gets beat.
Mm-hmm.
And so, And also just with that, with handling bull rushers, the hand placement's not always there, and that's something that he's going to need to refine. This is another thing that needs coaching. So I mean, overall, I think that he's a guy that has some potential. He has some potential NFL stuff there. There are obviously questions, and that's why he's so far down in the draft. But
Right.
I think that he's a guy that could be a reserve for the Colts, and it's just really all up to, can he put it all together? And that's just something that that's what you do when you take some of these 7th round guys. Sometimes there's guys where, or late round guys. There's guys that they have the physical tools. Now you need to try to develop them, and then you can get lucky sometimes with some of those players who have those physical tools. They just have to be coached into them, and they have to just figure it out as they go. And so that's kind of my take on him from what I've read and kind of what I've seen here in the time that you were talking. And so I think it could be potentially a good pick. And like we've talked about earlier on the podcast, you can never have enough offensive linemen, and so that's the guy that would be a potential pick that would be good. And Chris Ballard really talked about that, Derek, in his press conference after the season was over. Just that lack of depth that was on the Colts offensive line, and we kind of talked about it on this podcast, and I kind of thought about it all season. Before the Colts started playing in 2019, you got really lucky and really fortunate that all 5 of your offensive linemen were, healthy pretty much the entire season. And you think about it, if one of those guys were to go down for multiple weeks, that forces a guy like Joe Haig, a guy like LaRaven Clark, one of those guys into a totally different role than they had in 2019. And so always felt like that was a need. And I think that, you can maybe find a few other guys, a few more depth pieces in free agency potentially. But drafting a guy like Kramer is certainly a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about, this draft is all about, getting that depth and about understanding what positions need to go where. So obviously we're going to have a lot more fun talking about this. We're going to have a lot more options to talk about. It's going to be a really fun off season to talk about this. But anyway, just so that way we can make sure everybody understands where I'm at here. So obviously with that first pick, I have Javon Kinlaw, defensive tackle from South Carolina. Second pick that we have is KJ Hamler, the wide receiver from Penn State University. Third pick is Damian Lewis, the interior offensive lineman from LSU. Fourth pick is Bryson Hopkins, the tight end from Purdue. Fifth pick is Marlon Davidson, edge rusher from Auburn. Sixth pick is Benjamin Victor, wide receiver from The Ohio State University. Seventh pick, Justin Herman, an offensive tackle from Wake Forest. Eighth pick, Kendall Coleman, edge rusher from Syracuse. And ninth pick is Tommy Kramer, interior offensive lineman from Notre Dame. So that is my first version of the Colts mock draft. We're going to have Cody do his, and we're going to probably get that up before the end of the month. Just depends on when we're going to get that uploaded. But because we'll have some more things to talk about. But anyway, I think that's going to be it for this mock draft. And obviously we have a few other things we'll talk about in weeks prior. But Cody, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we head off here?
Well, just don't kill Derek because he didn't take a quarterback. That's all I gotta say.
I feel like I'm gonna get crucified by some of the people in the comments. I feel like I will. It's okay. Yeah. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. And also, if people are that mad at me about it, they obviously didn't hear me when I mentioned that. Again, I'm not opposed to taking a quarterback. I just don't know enough information to make a call on a quarterback yet.
So what I'm hearing is Derek loves Jacoby Brissett, and he thinks he should be signed to a 10-year extension. That's what I'm hearing.
No. Again, stop making me do that. I hate saying that because, I love Jacoby Brissett. I think he's a great guy, and I think he's a decent quarterback, but you're making me say as if, I think he's trash. I don't think he's trash. It's just, gosh, you're making me mad when you say that.
It is interesting. Gosh. That is Colts Twitter in a nutshell right there. Yeah. Jacoby Brissett, he's great. He's good. or he's completely garbage. He's Curtis Painter 2.0.
And
Like, it's kind of funny. There's no in between.
Yeah, there's no in between on that. And listen, I'm all in on Ballard trading up to go Justin Herbert. I don't care what any of you in the comments say. Okay, I like Justin Herbert more than any other quarterback prospect in this draft outside of Joe Burrow. We're obviously not getting Joe Burrow. So that's my big thing. If you haven't already noticed that from my Twitter, then I don't know what else you're doing. So
no love for love, huh?
I mean, I like Love. I do. I think he might be the one that we end up with, but I'm not. I would rather have Herbert. But again, that's for another topic for another day, and I'll go into it a little more later on. Anyway, so thank you all so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this one. Hopefully, you got some insight from myself, and maybe give me some comments down there. Let me know what you think. Some suggestions, maybe some people I should look at to see if I can maybe put that in my mock draft. But thanks, guys, again for watching. And as always, go Colts.